Hello and welcome. Thanks for watching. This video is in response to the last performance I just gave of the Bach Cello Suite Prelude of the Cello Suite number 2. And then also my Trombone Fantasy number 1. A lot of times as a light composer myself, I'm really inspired by a lot of pieces that I play. And one thing that I do almost every single day is go through these Bach Cello Suites. So I work on these a lot because they work on a lot of the concepts that I struggle with as a player. Intonation, clean articulation, having longevity or the endurance to be able to get through a really, really long set of pieces. I only played one movement, and I think there's about 5 or 6 just in that second suite alone that I typically work through. So I also throw on a drone, so just really it helps keep me at a high level with all of the typical things that again I struggle with. There's also a lot of flexibility because Bach, the way he wrote this music, it was really structured in chords. Obviously, it wasn't designed for trombone. It was designed for cello, and cello has the ability to even sort of at least spell out a couple of chords in a couple of ways because they can make more than one string sound at the same time. Trombone technically can only make one sound at a time. I'll make another video about multiphonics some other day. But in general, so that's the idea there. Interestingly enough, although I just mentioned that this specific movement has no extra notes being sound at the same time except for the final note, the final chord, actually. And so if you listen to a cello play it, it would be done very differently than the way I do it. I play one note at a time and I work my way up that scale. Ba-da-bum-bum. A couple other things about the Bach Cello Suites is that, first of all, they were relatively unknown. In fact, I think they were actually rediscovered after hundreds of years of being completely unknown pieces of work that Bach wrote. And they've had a recent revival. Obviously, they're very, very famous at this point. But being Bach and being back in the 1700s, notation was a little bit different, and expectations of what and how you notate was also done a little bit differently. So there's huge portions of, in mostly the Prelude, that would have been written out differently. A lot of times they would have just had straight chords for each measure. And then it was up to the performer to kind of work their way through it. So improv for jazz players, right, was something that was actually expected of classical musicians to a higher degree back then than it is in today's world. So those are just some of the interesting things about Bach Cello Suites and why I work on them all the time. And then on top of that, they usually they're really, really musical. A lot of the music from the top of the page to the bottom of the page is just filled with 16th notes, which might sound a little bit daunting, but what's really cool about it is as you listen to the music in terms of the flexibility in the tempo, these notes go from really, really fast to really, really slow. And a great example of that is way towards the last third of the piece. I get through this whole section, and then there's 2 beats of rest. And I usually, empty out my water at that point, but it's written in to have that space. And then after that, I think it's nearly 2 lines of 16th notes aside from one note there. But listen to, again, how this should go. And 16th notes, just like any other note, if you're comparing them to any other 16th note, or an 8th note to an 8th note, or a quarter note to a quarter note, they should all technically have that same value. Bump, 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 or whatever it is, whatever your tempo is. So the fact that I can really play with this and it still sounds right is just really cool. And it leaves you so many opportunities for interpretation. So again, here is just some of those runs of 16th notes. I got to that final note there, all those notes were 16th notes. And again, if I just went for it, it'd be ba, ba, dun, 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 right? So the tempo really is fluctuating a lot. And you have the ability to do that, but the hard part is also making it sound musical. And so that is a daily struggle with me. Sometimes I'm doing better than that and than others. I actually recorded this a couple of days ago, and I didn't really like how I did it, so I just re-recorded everything because I wasn't happy with my interpretation. So hopefully I like this one more, right? So then let's talk about my fantasy trombone number one. So when I had the concept of coming up with this piece, I thought, man, how cool would it be if Bach was alive today with the way that he wrote music and all that sort of stuff? How would he maybe write something specifically for trombone inspired by these Bach Cello Suites? And so that's how I came up with this opening to this piece. And so a lot of the similarities are actually between this specific prelude and the way I wrote this one. So they both start out with just this kind of statement of a minor chord. So the Bach Cello Suite starts out with a D minor chord, a D, F, and an A. And then it just kind of moves on, and it keeps building with these little rhythmic motifs. And you can kind of play with that. And again, it just kind of works its way throughout this whole first page, really. And in mine, I start out with an E minor chord, so it's not terribly far away, just one step up. And E, G, B. And then I also kind of go da 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 dum, and then I moved away from that pretty quickly from what Bach was doing to something that I did. But I have a lot of these little rhythmic motifs as well. Right? Not maybe as well written out as Bach, right? He's really filled out these chords and you know, was really the music moved through the notation as opposed to I'm more rhythmic, and so I use my rhythms more in this instance. So again, here's my opening. So again, you can listen back to this. That little motif comes back 2 or 3 times in this piece. It even comes back in a different way, just filled out as opposed to as rhythmic as it is. Another interesting thing about this is I write better when I'm on the piano. So I was writing all of this on the piano. It's a little bit easier for me because, you know, both of my hands are kind of involved when I'm playing the trombone. And so not only do I have to kind of come up with something, and it's harder to see it when it's all on a slide. It's really easy for me to see it on the keys. So I just I'm able to just kind of write this stuff out, and I can see the chords better and all that sort of stuff. So I compose this on the piano, knowing, you know, what the capabilities of the trombone were as I was writing it out. Similar to how Bach wrote this, his prelude out, it was obviously designed for a cello and what accentuated the cello the best. So always with myself, I'm trying to show off what the trombone can do and trying to push myself as a player to be playing to the best of my abilities. So there were some things that, you try and stay in what we call the money zone where the instrument sounds the best. But I also try to get to the top or even the bottom side of my playing. So, I go all the way up to a really high E flat, which I don't think it was my best hit on that run, but... Right, so those notes right there, those are Well, those are basically some of the highest notes that are ever asked of a trombone player in a professional setting to play. Obviously, we can play higher than that. The instrument doesn't really start sounding like the trombone after that. Maybe I'll try it out, but it starts sounding just a little bit squeaky. You just lose some of the actual pure tone of the trombone. So that's why you start not really writing notes above that. It just doesn't sound great on the trombone. I also finish on a really, I think it's just an E flat down here, which the trombone can go much lower than that. The only way I can play it is through my trigger. So you do need a trigger trombone in order to get through this section here. Another fun thing that I thought was nice, harkening back and forth, is that the Prelude has 2 beats of rest, and also my Fantasy has 2 beats of rest. Actually, pretty much 2/3 of the way through. Not totally intentional, but it's just kind of fun when it works out that way. And then we also kind of just finish similarly. Where I guess, I don't know. I suppose most pieces start or end this way, but yeah, I spell out a chord. I write it out differently than Bach did. Bach just had a chord that, you know, a D minor chord, ba-da-bum-bum, and I wrote out a little bit more rhythmically, specifically what to do as playing this on the trombone. So Bach's last 2 measures sound like this. Meanwhile, mine sounds like this. So it's not uncommon to end on a long tone, which is what I was about to say, which is not smart. But just there's some similarities with how we found a way to finish our piece there. The last thing that I'll mention is that Bach was really, really tonal with his music. He didn't really go too far outside of what would be natural in his scales. And I pushed that a little bit more. I wasn't so worried about, I'm playing something in the key of E minor, and in fact that's one difference between the pieces. I actually start in E minor and my piece ends in a totally different key, F minor, right there. And so it just kind of randomly modulates, but you don't necessarily notice it, which again is just a really cool thing. I'm not a fantastic composer. I didn't spend years studying how to do this sort of stuff. So when things work out like that and it feels as natural as it is, and I didn't do it on purpose, it makes me feel good that something like that was able to make its way onto a piece of paper. So this is a lot of the similarities, a lot of the things that I drew from the Bach Cello Suites, and incorporated into my music here. So that is my Trombone Fantasy #1, and that's where a lot of this came from. So hope you enjoyed. If you haven't seen that music, go ahead. It's just the video before this one, really, in Patreon, or you can find it on YouTube. I'll leave some links below. But thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your week.